So that was actually a great segue into this panel. One of the aims of both the initiative and more specific to this workshop is thinking about this question of how can we put research into practice, and how can those of us who are sitting, I'll admit I sit in the ivory tower and we're sitting there in academia, and a lot of times we're thinking about one set of questions, and what practitioners out in the field would like to know maybe a very different set of questions. And so, one of the challenges that you face as you're trying to get one of the initiative like this going up or forming these partnerships is how do you actually get that ball rolling? How do you start the partnership? And what this panel is going to be about is sort of a blueprint on how one particular partnership has come about and how there's been successful collaborations between academics and practitioners, sort of what are the lessons learned, how has this come about. So with that, I'll give just a quick background on how this partnership came about, and then turn it over to Dave and Emily. So last winter, I got a call from Dave and folks at Environmental Defense Fund about a one-day workshop they were putting together in DC that they wanted to bring in some academics who are working in the area of decision science with the question of how at Environmental Defense Fund can we apply insights from decision science to attract new members, attract more gifts coming in, improve our operations. And as part of that, we were brought in, and the first half of the day was we all gave half-hour, 45-minute talk on here's what our research, what we've learned. Then the second half of the day was breakout groups where it was small tables that were sitting around, and it was talking about specific examples and what would be strategies or what would be things, insights that you can apply that you may learn something and could help us raise more money, attract new members, meet this goal. As I walked away from that, saying, wow, this is exactly what we want to try to accomplish with SPI. This would be great. Followed up with Dave and saying, are there things we could actually put into practice? And something we'll talk about at the end is actually an experiment that we did this summer working with EDF on thinking of new ways to organize their summer match campaign. And I think we've, applying insights from behavioral that I believe it has been pretty effective, and we've learned some things, and we'll talk about it at the end. But I'll turn it over to Dave and Emily now.
Okay. So I'm curious, how many of you are practitioners versus, well, how many are you are practitioners?
Wow.
So a decent number. So you have been doing this for a while probably, and you're always looking for new and different ways to raise more money from your donors and get new donors, and that's sort of where we were, and we still are. About 2.5 years ago, our Office of Chief Scientist put together a staff retreat for the entire organization where we talked about decision science. And we talked about how we could use the learnings from decision science not only in fundraising and getting more donors, but also in all of our program work. So Environmental Defense Fund, there's probably only one or two of you who have ever heard of us, but we're about a $110 million organization. We have about 400 employees, and we have 750,000 or thereabouts members and activists across the country. And we do work on climate change, on the health of the oceans, on human health, around toxic chemical reform, as well as land, water, and wildlife efforts. So, number one, we're not a very well-known organization, except for in certain circles. We helped FedEx come up with the hybrid truck. We worked with McDonald's to get rid of the styrofoam clamshell, which produced a tremendous amount of garbage. We worked with the Bush administration on putting together cap and trade for acid rain. So we have a long history of a lot of great successes. But we also compete with other organizations of our size. So the NRDCs, the WWFs, the TNCs, organizations that have much larger brand recognition than we have. And so our donors are giving to about 4 or 5 other environmental organizations. And that's true for just about every charity. Individuals want to contribute to a wide variety of organizations in a particular group or ecosystem. And so we had to figure out, how do we differentiate ourselves? And so I've been in direct marketing for longer than I am willing to admit, but we were looking for ways that we could really take our message up a notch. And when the Office of Chief Scientist put together Decision Science Retreat, I fell in love with the concept. I thought, this is it. This is where we need to go. And this is how we can differentiate ourselves. And so after that, I was very intrigued, and I said, well, what books can I read? What classes can I go to? And so I started consuming a huge number of books. So for all of you practitioners out there, I would encourage you to reach out and look at different books that you can read. Dan Ariely's Predictably Irrational is a perfect book to start with. Brain Fluence, Thinking Fast and Slow. I mean, there's a lot of very good books out there that you can read. The Y-axis, which I'm dying to read next. So there's a lot of things that you can just read and get excited about. And so I started reading. I started bringing in our agencies, and Emily is with Chapman Kubine Adams Hussey, which is one of our direct marketing firms. We also have another firm that does our direct mail, SCA Direct, which is a division of Omnicom. You may have heard of them. They're a very large organization. And so I started bringing all these ideas to our regular meetings, and I gave them books to read, and so they got excited as well, because agencies are competing with each other, and they're looking for ways to differentiate themselves, and they're looking for ways to add value to their clients, not just you, but all of their clients. So if you're on the academic side, I would strongly encourage you to work with agencies as well as trying to work with the actual individuals, because if you work with an agency, you're going to be able to amplify your effort tremendously, because they are hungry and they're looking for ways to differentiate themselves and to bring more value. And we're looking for ways as practitioners to increase our value to the organization and also to ourselves as practitioners. So we're also very excited about it. After we had our decision science retreat, and after I had everybody read these books, I started looking for decision science conferences. And for those practitioners out there, you'll know that if you go to nonprofit conferences, they're pretty much the same. And you've been going to these things for years, and they basically show you PowerPoint presentations, and they show this is what we did and this is what you can do, and then you write down about 5 ideas and then you leave. In the for-profit space, they're much farther ahead than we are. They have adopted decision science already, and they've been able to prove it out. So there's opportunities that you can go into conferences, and I attended a conference last year in Boston that was dedicated just to decision science, and they were talking about how for-profit organizations are using this and leveraging it. And so there's a lot of information that you can glean on the for-profit space at this point and bring it back to the nonprofit space, which is wonderful. And then we decided that we were going to have our own workshop. And we brought in 4 individuals, Paul Slovic, Michael, Adam Grant, and Aaron Reed, who I met at the conference that I attended before. And we did a workshop just for my team and also our agencies. So they were very willing to come in and do this with us. Our social scientist, we did hire a social scientist on staff, and his whole role is to integrate decision science within the EDF across the board into our program communications as well as to our fundraising. And so with his help, we put together this great workshop, and we're able to learn as much as we possibly can. And our agencies, as Emily can attest to, got very excited about what they could be learning and what they could be doing. And so since then, since 2.5 years ago, we've implemented about 40 or maybe 45 decision science-based tests. So I said we have 750,000 members and activists. We have 250,000 of those folks are actually giving us a donation. So we have a very large pool of people that we can test and draw upon. And we continue with just about everything that we push out, every email, every direct mail piece, and soon our telemarketing campaigns, and also our website, which I have some examples of what we've done on the web. With everything that we push out, we're testing something. And if it's not a decision science thing, it's some other related piece. And if you've been in this field, you're fairly good, sophisticated direct marketers, and so you understand how to go about setting these types of experiments up. Emily,
Yes, yeah, sure. So with EDF's leading the way, we decided after the conference with Dave and with Mike Price, we actually ended up bringing Mike to our own retreat and bringing it so that the entire company could kind of talk about these ideas and how we can use them across clients. We work across issues. We have environmental, political, women's health, all sorts of issues with all sorts of different sizes of donor bases. So with EDF, it's been really nice because we have this field where we have so many different donors, and it doesn't take too long to have some sort of statistical significance. So with EDF leading the way, we're kind of bringing these ideas and being like, see, look, it works, to our other clients who sometimes, need a bit more prodding or are a little more cautious with these new ideas. So it's been a really great learning experience for our entire company and our hopefully all of our clients eventually will get on board. And it's been really neat to be able to test these things out with EDF so far.
And the good thing about it, we're all about taking risks. So we're a very risk-taking organization.
It's true.
And we're finding that we probably take a lot more risks than other organizations. But, if nothing ventured, nothing gained. So, but the great thing about decision
I wish
science
all of my clients had that same
testing
attitude.
is that, out of those 40 or 45 tests that we have run so far, we haven't seen anything that has caused us a significant amount of revenue. So if we put something out and it doesn't work, usually that it's flat. It's not that, we see a huge decrease in response rate or a huge decline in average gift. It's really, you'll see that it's flat or you have an upside. And sometimes the upside is modest and it's like, oh, well, that was interesting, so I'm nipping away at the margins. And there's other times where it's just astronomically off the charts and you can't even believe the results and you have to retest it and retest it and retest it. And then you finally are learning that this is the way to go. The thing that if you have a large enough group of people, a large enough donor base, the thing that we're seeing is that there are significant differences in the way that people behave based off of demographics, based off of their giving amount, the channel through which you're communicating them, and the various type of a campaign. So, we have a renewal campaign for our membership base. We have appeals campaign, which are special appeals. Please give us money for this particular issue. We have our cultivation campaigns, et cetera. And each time that we implement one of those campaigns, we're testing various elements of decision science. And we're finding that in the appeals program, the decision science things that we're learning don't necessarily apply to the renewal campaign, and vice versa. We're learning that the way that you communicate with someone through email does not necessarily translate to the way that you could connect with them in direct mail. So there's tremendous amount of layering on with this information, which from a direct marketer makes my job much more interesting and makes the program that much richer. And hopefully one day it will make me richer, but I doubt it. But you really are getting to understand the subtle nuances of your file. Our online file is about 10 to 15 years younger than our offline file. So you have a completely different set of thinking motivations with those particular type of people than you do with your older folks. And with 250,000 member base, we have about 5 very distinct personas within that group. And we're an environmental organization, so why do you give to an environmental organization? Some people want to protect the planet, some people are outdoors enthusiasts and they like to go outside and mountain bike. And then there's people who like to garden and they just want to get their hands dirty. And then we also have what we call our professors, who are extraordinarily well educated, PhD economists and academicians that they want to learn things about why are things working that we're doing. So each one of those have different motivations. They respond to different things. And so for us, the challenge, particularly for our agencies, is our segmentation is getting that much richer and that much more complicated. But we're seeing significant return on investment in the testing that we're doing.
Yeah, I think some of the coolest things that we've done so far based on gender, also understanding how women and men give very differently and for different reasons to different organizations. They give different amounts. We've also looked at our high dollar donors of an X dollar amount versus our low dollar donors, and it's just giving us a much richer perspective on who we're talking to every day or every month if you're in the mail. So I think that's been extraordinarily helpful, and I think knowing your donors better is always going to lead to better results in the end. So
I do have some slides of things that we have tested if you're interested in seeing that. And I said, we've done 40 to 45 tests so far. what I'm going to show is not all 45. I don't want to bore you with that, but some of the more counterintuitive things that we've learned are some of the things that are, much more interesting. Around social norms, so we had talked about the fact that, people want to know what their neighbors have done. So this is our renewal campaign, or one of our renewal campaigns. And so you can see that we pulled out 875 people in Fairfax have already donated. And so the first time that we tested this in FY12, we saw a 10% increase in our overall net donor revenue. The second time we tested it in FY13, it was basically flat. So we're retesting it again to see if there is a way that we can further isolate based off of now what we know about various giving levels as well as different personas within our file, if there are certain people who are more susceptible to this particular type of treatment. And our hypothesis is that that's the case.
Can you explain what's the decision scientist here? This looks to me like marketing.
It is marketing, and it is marketing. It absolutely is marketing. And so that's when, when I first learned about the decision science component, I have been in marketing for 25 years, direct marketing. And so I know what works. I just didn't necessarily know why it worked. I knew that, you could say certain things. I knew that you could give people a dime in the mail and they would respond. But I didn't understand that it was the whole concept of reciprocity or the specific around the decision science or behavioral economics principle behind it. And once you understand that, yes.
Yeah, it's
So
the
once
lens that has proven to be the most interesting.
Yeah.
I think that we've been doing these things for a long time and we understand them in basic principles, but the lens is giving us a lot more insight as to what that actually means.
So is there an example of how you do things differently now that you have this lens?
Oh, absolutely. So, we incorporate much more of these particular things. And now that we also understand, the principles and the concepts and they have a name, it focuses our brainstorming. It focuses our testing. So we understand that we're trying to achieve a particular outcome with this mailing or with this particular campaign. And so instead of, if you all are, many of you are practitioners, and so when you get into a conference room and you start brainstorming ideas of ways that you can improve the performance of a particular campaign. The beauty of decision science for us is that it adds a tremendous amount of focus. So if we're saying, well, what we're trying to do here is test the social norm component of this because this is a renewal campaign. So you're not talking about all the different types of things. Well, what if we put in a red buck slip? Or what if we did this and put a first class stamp on it? You're very, very focused and you know what the outcome is that you're trying to achieve. So for us, it's been extremely liberating from that standpoint. And it actually adds a lot more value to the program. Yes?
So if I can just ask you, this is all very, very, very good. You mentioned that you hired a social scientist to do this, but I'm just curious what that's, is this part of the takeaways from that sort of exercise? Are they helping you with that? How does that
Reiner does help us with the tests, so he's been on board since last October. So some of these tests, we started right after our staff retreat, so before he came on board. The things that he's been working with us on right now, we have a large test that we're going to be pushing out in email around motivations for environmental issues. So the hypothesis is that people look at different things or different activities very discreetly. So if I take an action and tell my senator to support a particular environmental bill, that's a proxy for me so that I don't have to give you a donation. Or if I drive a Prius, or if I recycle, or if I compost, that's my contribution to the environment, and so therefore I don't have to donate. So we're testing that through a series of emails, and Reiner and our chief economic group is working with us on that as well, so that we can have a better understanding of what motivates people and what is the cadence of communication. So if we ask you to donate first, and then we ask you to take a personal action, and then we ask you to voice your opinion to your elected official, is that more effective in achieving the overall goal of what we're trying to do? And so understanding that sort of communication cadence for us will be able to hopefully increase all of those activities, all of which are important to us.
I'm curious about the reaction that your board had to this process, or your leadership in this process. Not that they were being investigated or tested, given maybe their giving levels, but obviously they have a sense of what the community might be feeling about these kind of practices? And also, what did you give up to do this? In other words, was this plus budget dollars? Did you decide that we can't do something else, we want to do this instead? What were some of the choices you made there?
Our leadership is totally on board with this. They're very excited about the outcome of what decision science can bring to us. My department, being the direct marketing department, it has been the first to embrace it and to adopt it. And at our staff retreat, we have a yearly staff retreat. At our last staff retreat, I presented results from the test that we had run and the effect that it has had on membership fundraising. So all of our executives are very on board with this. So hiring a social scientist to join was certainly part of their decision.
Can you share some of those results? Just give an example of what the impact was.
Sure, yeah, and that's what this presentation here is. But there are certain things that we have done that have doubled or tripled our revenue versus what we were using in our control group. Your other question of like...
So you've made that statement a few times, and what I always wonder when I hear that result is if people are just shifting their gifts through time. So your last slide said something about a 10% lift in revenues, and right away I think, well, that's just people who were going to give in 6 months. They're just shifting backwards. And I'm sure you've looked at that. You look at donor profiles for the next few years, and then that's why you're making the statement 10%. But it's got to be less than 10% probably. I don't think that's happening.
The other issue is there is perfect substitution from WWA.
It's a different question.
That's a different question.
A different but important question, a much more important question for big picture stuff. I think the smaller, short-term stuff that you can immediately take on is how does this affect the gift distribution through time? Am I just taken away in 6 months? Maybe you can tell us that, but I think...
I can. So to answer your last question, we haven't given up anything, and this decision science testing doesn't cost anything. It's just a different type of testing. So we test with every single thing that we do. So now we're very specific about incorporating the decision science principle in that test. So there's no trade-off, essentially. And as far as your question, John, is we do look at lifetime value of everything that we test. So when we put something out there, we will see what is the ultimate long-term effect for a member's profile over time. So we do have certain groups that we have that have been in control groups for a period of time. At the beginning of this year, we put a group of people into a less communication group, and we watched how they performed over time. And those folks had lower value than those people that we maintained our communication stream. We've looked at people who, when we are introducing certain types of messaging, there's this group here, social proofing. So we saw a $33 increase in net revenue per donor, but this only applied for our high dollar file, which was $100 and plus. So we watched how these people perform over time. The lifetime value increase of these particular folks is about 1.25 when we include this particular piece. So we're not bringing their gift up, and we're not necessarily saying that that's the only thing that they're going to give. We're building a relationship with these people so that they are giving us more over time. So, and we do watch that significantly.
Let's push on that a little bit, because I think this is an important point for specific areas. So you could see where you're just moving around a gift in 6 months until today. You can see a model where if you can get them to give today, they're actually more valuable in 6 or 12 months. So that means that your 10% is an underestimate, not an overestimate. What do you find, if you look at all of your drives, do you find that effect is smaller than what you initially thought? Is it greater than what you initially thought because you're inducing new people to come in, and once you get them in the first time, it's very important, and they end up giving more through time? What do you said you have 40 studies, so you could actually probably speak to this.
So, well, not all 40 are necessarily in acquisition, so which is bringing people in. But right. So those that we have looked at the lifetime value for, if we're seeing a significant increase like this, we are looking at the lifetime value of the impact of that particular cell. that we have tested.
Yeah, that's what
So-
I'm wondering is if it was 10% in the very first drive, does it end up being 8% in the long term or 12%? Is that, was it 10% too optimistic or too pessimistic?
That particular group we did not look at. So I can't answer that question. But this particular group we've looked at a couple other groups as well. So, I would say that we've probably, out of those 40 tests, we've looked at about 8 on the back end lifetime value of the impact of what those folks have produced. And we haven't seen.
Absolutely. Well, both groups have standard, absolutely. So, and then you start to ask questions like what Glenn's getting into, that's more of a meta or macro type of idea for the entire sector is, does science actually make the pie bigger? Or is it just the case that people who know the science are stealing from each other? I think there'll be a little bit of both, but the science is still unknown. I think that's one of the most important questions that we as academics face is there will be some stealing, but according to my graph, you would say there's very little growth, but that's because I think we don't know.
Labeled stealing.
Call it whatever you want.
It'd be work because it's for
Whatever you want to call it.
Well, and I know what you're saying. I mean, we are somewhat. We know that people who are in our space, there's only 10 million people in the country that donate to environmental organizations, and so many of the large organizations like us, TNC, WWF, NWF, we share many of those donors, and we all know that. So we are essentially, stealing money, if you will, from each other because we know how to encourage a donation. We are trying to broaden out the pie. We are looking for ways to go into a larger group of individuals. Testing that we have done fairly aggressively this year, looking at new list sources that are not necessarily associated with environmental organizations, and we have found a few that are working for us. Going out online, particularly, trying to find people in different spaces through modeling and through other types of behavioral aspects, and we are finding success there as well. So we're looking to broaden our pie so that we're not necessarily stealing from others. But the analysis that we've done is that individuals who give just exclusively to EDF and nobody else in our cohort are much less valuable to us in the long term. We've looked at this for the last 2 or 3 years, and really what drives their lifetime value for us is that they are giving to other organizations in our space.
So people who like to eat apples like to eat peanut apples.
Yes.
Can I actually ask a quick question? I'm interested in your team makeup.
Mm-hmm.
The institution that I'm at, we have been also a really extremely complex testing matrix throughout renewals acquisition. And we've got the luck of great leadership as well. That said, it's been interesting internally with my team to figure out exactly how we manage this. And we're doing it partially through the help of agencies, but we're also internally trying to figure out who do we need from a data perspective, who do we need from a project management perspective, so that we're able to manage the heightened testing that's happening. And so I would just love to hear how your team is made up as we're considering what we need for the next handful of years.
So I don't have people who are dedicated specifically to a particular type of a program or channel. So individuals, I have one person that is responsible for content, one person that's responsible for segmentation and analytics. We have a production manager who does all of our direct mail production. We have one person who does all of our email. And we have a manager of that group. So it's a very small organization, and that's why we rely heavily on our partners. It's easier to work with and outsource parts of these aspects than it is to manage them internally. So we offer a very... I'm sorry?
The segmentation.
It happens internally. So it happens internally within our organization. So, and we use a very sophisticated segmentation tool called Unica, which is provided by IBM. Very few nonprofits use it. AARP and I think AARP is the only one that we have found that's like us that uses Unica. But it's a very, very sophisticated segmentation tool.
So we have a question from the web
Oh.
environment, and this is a really good question, I think. So David Reinstein from the University of Essex in the UK Economics Department is saying that he's made numerous contacts with fundraisers and charities and suggested several innovations in fundraising to test. And most people in academics find these ideas very interesting, but in spite of the initial enthusiasm, it's extremely difficult to get these organizations to actually commit to doing anything. And people are in this field are very reluctant to do anything involving randomization. So he's wanting to know from everybody who's a practitioner in the audience, do you have any suggestions for how to get over this hump and how to get nonprofits engaged in doing this sort of research?
Well, from our standpoint, I mean, organizations that are of our size and larger, I have not found that they are afraid of randomization. So if you go to any conference, they're constantly showing test and control, what's worked and what's not. We live and breathe by that. I mean, testing is in our blood. I mean, we're consummate direct marketers. So I think part of the challenge would be to find a partner that's large enough that can do this and who understands the purpose behind it and supports it. What I'm noticing is that there's a lot of people who are used to be in the commercial space. I came from AOL, so I understand testing and I understand the importance of it. And they're moving into the nonprofit space because they're at this point in our lives, we're wanting to give back and we're wanting to make a difference. And so these people understand and appreciate the commercial side of direct marketing, and so they're bringing those disciplines into the nonprofit space. And so, and it's not to say that the folks who are have grown up in nonprofits don't understand and appreciate direct marketing as well. We all do, and I think we all want to do a better job at what we're doing and get better results for our organization. So for that answer, I would say that, you know, really focusing on organizations that are larger, that have a larger pool of people, there would be more acceptance for this type of testing.
I think one of the struggles with smaller organizations, at least that we've seen, is that online with, I work primarily online, but so we can send out a couple of emails and get statistical significance on bigger campaigns. The problem is with smaller audiences, it just takes a longer, it's a lot bigger of an investment for one specific test. So without a whole lot of evidence, because this is a newer thing, it takes a little longer for smaller nonprofits to kind of wrap their head around committing 3 months of their emailing to one specific test. So I think that's kind of, and going off of what Dave said, maybe focusing on a larger audience or larger nonprofits to start with. But that's, at least from what I've seen, that's the struggle with smaller nonprofits. It's not an unwillingness to try something new. It's that they've got a lot at stake. 3 months or however long, that's a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. So I'm a PhD student at Chicago who does not practitioners. My question is, most of the examples you showed, like the social proof and matching and all, these have been tried and tested a couple of times, and there are sort of proof that this might work. But how open are you to sort of new ideas? Because we as researchers sometimes have completely new ideas which have not been tested, and we're looking for opportunities to test them in the field.
We are totally open. This is part of a presentation that I gave at the Direct Marketing Nonprofit Conference in July. And these are easy things for practitioners to get their head around, right? This is sort of like decision science training wheels. So you can easily do these types of tests and you can understand and get familiar with it. And I think that that's part of the challenge for practitioners when you're first sticking your toe in the water. You want to test something that you're familiar with, that you're like, oh yeah, I can kind of relate to that because we've done something like that, or oh, well, of course this is going to work because I always test this. And it gives them the confidence that they can continue to do this and they can begin to experiment in other things. So Michael can tell you about the summer match test that we did, which is quite sophisticated.
So at least with EDF, they've been very willing to think outside of the box and test different things. So the project that we worked on with them for the summer match was thinking, can you change the way that you frame the match and leverage the ideas? Can we leverage this notion, you know, I've done this all the time, right? You go into Kohl's and you're shopping, and you're like, if I spend $20 more, I'll get $10 more of Kohl's cash, right? forgetting that I'm spending the $20, I don't want to leave that possibility of 10 free dollars on the table. Right? So if we know that people don't like it and you have limited match funds, can you restructure the match instead of saying I'll give you a 2-to-1 match on every dollar that you contribute? Say I'll give 2-to-1 up to $25. Or then say 1-to-1 up to $50. And knowing that people aren't going to want to, maybe are averse to leaving money on the table, for that same $50 match, can I get greater out-of-pocket donations? This hadn't been tested on it. It was an idea that actually John and I were sitting around. John came up with it and through conversations and thinking, think of this as a 401k. If I want to match up to 10% of the salary, should I do it dollar to dollar or up to 10%, or I'll do 50 cents on the dollar up to 20% of your salary that you give? Would this work with a match campaign? So we set up the test was 2-for-1 on any dollar that was given, 1-to-1 on any dollar that was given, 2-to-1 up to what was the average gift for that segment the year before, or 1-to-1 up to twice that amount. And what you find that the 1-to-1 up to twice the amount was the superior fundraising mechanism. We brought in more donors and more dollars. And so that's an idea that hadn't been tested, was outside of the norm, and they were more than willing to implement it. And we did it with around 300,000 donors on it. So
I think the question, in one sense, I was expecting an answer that was conditional on, are you doing stuff online, then you can just send it out. If you're doing something, sending out by mails, then there are real costs of trying out. A PhD students are here, and I'm sure it's a brilliant one, but that's exactly where, and I think this is probably what you're talking about, either lab experiments have a role, or small-scale field experiments have a role, or even just regular old focus groups just try it out, then you ramp it out. But the field, you're doing a lot of online stuff, and I think that makes your transactions costs much, much lower, which is great.
The examples that I show here are online. Again, I was trying to get, the intent of this particular presentation was to get my fellow practitioners at the DMA Nonprofit Conference to begin to test this. We do a tremendous amount of direct mail as well. So the renewal campaign was a direct mail campaign. This is on our website, so it's something that's fairly simple to implement. And I'll just show you the difference on some of this. What we tried to do here was to show social proofing. So we had a quote, and then we also had the number of people who had had their gifts matched in the last week. And then we saw that there really wasn't a difference between either one of those two approaches until we dug down a little bit different, and we looked at people who were making their first gift to EDF versus people who were returning and being repeat givers. So again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that we see very significant differences between the way that people behave. Now, luckily, the system that we have allows us to cookie individuals once they come and make a gift, and so we have a very large cookie pool. So when you come to our website and we recognize that you've been there before, we give you a completely different treatment. We ask you for different amounts of money. We reflect how much you have given us in the past. If you're a sustaining donor, we ask you to upgrade your sustaining gift. If you're not a sustaining giver, we ask you to become a sustaining giver. So we have a very conditionalized treatment for people who are returning to our site. And we know if you've been to our site before but haven't given, and so then we treat you differently that way as well.
Dave, I think
are we running out of time?
We're out of time for the session, so.
Okay, this was a direct mail piece that we did, and I just want to, this is very quick. This is something that everybody will tell you to do, that reversing your ask string will help you increase your average gift. It's in almost every book that I ever read, so we're just like, well, this is a no-brainer. Of course we should do it. We've tested it 3 times, and every time we tested it, just pressed our response, and it just depressed our average gift, so we no longer test this. But this was also just for my fellow practitioners at the DMA conference, so that they could see that don't believe everything that you read in the books that are out there. Test it. Don't just do it blindly because it's written. All right. Well, if we're out of time, then. This was actually a test that we ran that did increase 2x revenue and 72% increase in our average gift, and we have looked at this on an LTV basis, and we are seeing strong LTV results from the test versus the control.
Can I just make a quick general point? Whoever's running this session, So, I love when people look at what's called heterogeneous treatment effects. So you're looking to see if men respond differently than women, or high, low, or black, white, whatever. You should always be careful because you probably looked at 20 other cuts of the data and none of those work. And then you find one that does, and you think it's truth, but it could just be what economists would say is just statistical error.
Mm-hmm.
Every 20 you look at, you should reject one just by chance.
Right.
So whenever I find things like that, I then will set up my next campaign to test that directly and say, this is what I'm going after, warm versus cold nesting in your particular case. And then after I start finding it again and again, I will begin to believe the result. But I would never believe a result just from what economists call data fishing, because again, 1 out of every 20 cuts, you should find something significant.
Mm-hmm. And
Just
that's,
as a general.
that's a very good point.
A general
Yep.
thought.
And we do the same thing. So we don't roll something simply because it had a lift. We will test it again.
But notice also, John, how randomization is becoming hand-based and non-randomized, observational.
Absolutely.
The two can go together.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And experimentation is much more than just randomization. It's something that I talked about in the DDL paper. Experimentation, the father of lab experiments, at least within economics, very rarely use randomization. So a lot of people are doing experiments that don't always have randomization. Many times people say, to identify the treatment effect appropriately, I want randomization. But the experimental method is much, much deeper than just randomization.
Mm-hmm.
Thank everyone.